This platform is the Volunteerism Movement, and it will be Dr. Richard Koral who will be speaking this morning. He is one of the leaders here at the New York Society for Ethical Culture. He is also serving as part-time leader for the Ethical Humanist Society of Long Island. Richard studied the Humanist Institute at the Humanist Institute and holds a doctorate in ministry in interfaith pastoral counseling from the Hebrew Union College, as well as many other degrees and diplomas. He plays the guitar, he's in the choir, he's a lawyer, a modern Renaissance man he is. Richard's a longtime member of the ethical culture community, having been a member of the Ethical Culture Society of Westchester for many years. He served as its president in the 90s and early 2000s, and was also active at the American Ethical Union, our national federation, serving on its board as president from 2012 to 15. But on a more personal note, a year and a half ago, Richard was filling in as the newcomer host, which Susan does, and he gave me that free lunch. But he also came to my school and visited and just genuinely listened, and I appreciated that. It was clear through that listening and ability to ask reflective questions as I shared my own struggle with faith and looking for an active, progressive community. I knew this was the right place for me, and it was because of him. So let's give a welcome to Dr. Richard Koral.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to summer. Is this great? Finally, it's here. Well, before I get into the topic that's billed for today, the highs and lows of volunteerism, I have to comment on the events happening today as we sit here. This platform must never be silent when outrages are perpetrated by our elected officials and in our name, by which people are placed in peril for the fulfillment of some supposed policy, goals, and political ends. So I'm obviously talking about this made-up crisis, this artificial emergency, the outrage committed at the Mexican border, the arrest of asylum seekers, the sequestration of children, putting them in cages or foster care, and now the plans for detention camps on military bases. I've got to raise this up a little bit. It's the most foul, cruel, and despicable exercise of power. And the retraction of the policy by executive order last Wednesday was not really a retraction at all, just provided that families with children would be imprisoned together. And pursuant to a consent decree now in existence, they can only do that for 20 days. So that's a pretty short time considering asylum applications take so long to process. So the administration is trying to extend that so people can be held far longer, perhaps indefinitely. The president's claim is that when immigrants are released, they melt into the general population, never to be seen again. And this is not true. People who know say that there's a 95% show-up rate in court when these asylum claims are being considered. He also says that these are criminals and they cause all kinds of crime. We know that's just not true. But what is true is that the goal of this policy is to make the United States so uninviting, so unfriendly, and hazardous that immigrants who are escaping from civil unrest, violence, and chaos in their failing states in Central America will know they cannot count on us. Rather, they must go elsewhere. So much for Ronald Reagan's shining city on a hill, right? Or like a Death Star, I don't know. Forbidden, fearsome, maybe a gated community. That's what we're supposed to be. Not the refuge and sanctuary that we've been for so long, for so many tired and hungry, yearning to breathe free. Donald Trump has been leveraging a broken immigration system and Congress's inability to fix it. So he's taking a weakness, a policy defect, and conflating it into an emergency so he can claim to solve it only by abusing vulnerable people who have come here seeking safety. Well, it seems to many of us today that his efforts are inept and maybe backfiring. I suspect we're not paying enough attention to the electoral backwaters where his program is getting traction and support. Last year, Joe Schuman, one of our other leaders, highlighted a little book by Yale history professor Timothy Snyder called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. It's a kind of guidebook, a tour guide along the primrose path to democracy's end. Well, I didn't put my copy away. Instead, I've kept it near at hand to refer to from time to time when the sights seem obscure or the sounds are confusing. Scapegoating a weak minority, targeting someone with few legal rights to begin with, makes for a fruitful opportunity to break out the playbook and begin our race to what? Tyranny? The president works steadily and ferociously to stigmatize immigrants, especially those from Latin America. He tries to dehumanize them by calling them animals and an infestation. I mean, step back, and it's simply unbelievable to hear a political leader speak this way. But with repetition, even this can become normalized. Facts are not a bar or a constraint. He doesn't argue or debate. He doesn't stoop to prove his case. He simply repeats assertions loudly and regularly. Among the things that Snyder suggests in his book is to hold on to a belief in facts. When facts are under such an onslaught, it's not so easy. But to abandon facts is to abandon freedom, he writes. Donald Trump is not making mistakes about facts. He's deliberately saying things that are not true and in ways that appear instrumental. He's creating an alternate universe of images and feelings of insecurity that support a state of emergency. It's a picture of America that's in a state of carnage. Remember that word used in the inauguration speech? Under attack by hordes of vicious foreigners, where the essential nature of America is in danger of dilution, where those who are born here will feel like foreigners in our own land, or we'll have to dial 2 for English. When the number of people in detention starts swelling as these asylum reviews back up, the number of people held in these new military detention camps will number in the tens of thousands, and that's what they're preparing for. They say now they're preparing for 20,000 people. Donald Trump will then point to this tidal wave of dangerous invaders who are perched at the frontier ready to swarm over the land. There'll be more angry reproaches of the Democrats as the ones who caused all this chaos, and probably right before the election. Donald Trump keeps making a distinction between himself as the one preserving America against the uncivilized hordes, and the Democrats who will let everyone and everybody into the country, as a result of which we won't have a country anymore. Well, I think we all know that this choice is not so either or, not so comic bookishly black and white. There is an appropriate standard we could set for acceptable asylum seekers, an immigration law that makes tough choices through compromise and legislative action that acknowledges today's realities. Our country can have an immigration policy with predictability that people can rely on and which can be enforced in the ordinary course of events. But Donald Trump seems to rely on chaos. He prefers the lack of predictability. He likes to change his mind and confuse the adversary. But in the case of the asylum seekers, he's causing incalculable harm, and he shows little hesitation. Never before has the request for asylum been treated like a crime. He ordered the taking of young children from the parents arrested at the border and had them sent off to an administrative no man's land because the infrastructure was improvised on the fly and utterly chaotic, and then conducted in utter secrecy. Members of Congress, not to mention the media, can't penetrate and get the facts about who is being housed where and how parents will find their children again. I don't recall in my lifetime witnessing such a hue and cry over an objectionable government policy. There's been sounds like a universal cacophony of outrage, except not entirely unanimous. There are corners and backspaces where this treatment is being applauded. This is Donald Trump's mysterious base. And most Republicans in Congress have not, for the most part, raised any protest. They're cowed by this base. So I've also never seen such stubborn adherence to a program that's been so widely condemned. And it makes me wonder what Donald Trump knows. Why is this man smiling? He has his base to energize. Remember, on Wednesday he went to Minnesota to speak to a rally, and he was energized. But is there a bigger end game? Is this just the first step in a bold demonstration of power? This one is practiced on the powerless, a non-voting minority. Will it be followed by other outrages perpetrated on less marginal groups? Is there a bigger plan? Well, it's our duty to do all we can to discourage any steps along the path to tyranny. We cannot countenance any steps, not even the first. The problem, of course, about primrose paths is that they don't seem so consequential at the beginning. Like, hey, these are just illegal immigrants. And then we arrive at the cliff and surprise. So there are some things we can do. We can support our congressman, who has been very outspoken on this, and let him know we're behind him. We can write letters. If you saw Evie Yachnes, our own Evie Yachnes, had a letter in the Times about child separations, and she's not here today because there's a reunion of the kinder transport people, the last ones surviving. And we should learn how much we have caused this, what our role was in causing this by helping foster some of the chaos in El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And of course, there are some organizations that are helping the immigrants at the border. And on the table, there's a list of some that was put together by our own Meg Chapman. And look at that list and see what you can do and to participate in this. Okay. This seems kind of anticlimactic after that, I tell you. Volunteerism. Well, several years ago, I took an opportunity to join a group going to Nicaragua to build simple housing. It was like a Habitat for Humanity, but it was called Bridges to Community, a different group. But they did the same thing. A small group of us flew down to Nicaragua. We were driven out to a place 30 miles outside the capital of Managua. And we were housed in a small dormitory set up in a little house in the middle of a little village. There we helped construct a couple of small but sturdy one-story open plan houses. Basically, it was a matter of mixing cement and building 4 walls with cinder blocks. The workers are mostly gringos like us, but there were also a couple of locals who were paid workers, and they included a skilled mason who set up the row lines and supervised important things like the corners and policed the regularity of the rows that we built up of the cinder blocks. It was satisfying work. And in looking around the community there and seeing the state of some of the housing, it was clear that these simple dwellings that we built were a real improvement over what they had. Many families lived in shacks built of scrap lumber, thatched roofs that were really no match for the acidic fallout that drifted over from a nearby volcano. In one of our days over there, the program director asked if we could construct a playground. Someone apparently donated one of those big wooden structures with swings and tower and steps and everything. All the raw lumber was there, but no instructions. Just a picture of what the final thing was supposed to look like. But, you know, we did have the skills. We were all handy people, and one of our group was actually a general contractor. So we were pretty handy. And by sundown, the whole thing was up, and local kids started streaming over to climb onto it and try it out. And that was really cool. When we left Nicaragua, we could say that we lifted up a small part of the world in a demonstrable way and helped pave the way for a couple of families to improve their conditions, stabilize their lives. The total cost? Well, the airfare was about $1,000, and had to contribute something to our board and administrative expenses. I figured, though, if we just sent the money down there, That could have translated into maybe 300 hours of paid work, affording not only new housing, but also income in the local community, enhancing skills, self-sufficiency, pride, and personal investment in their own community. By avoiding the airfare, we probably could have saved about 12 tons of carbon in the atmosphere. So by winging down there for a week like alien invaders, performing some abracadabra and then dematerializing without a trace, was there a net benefit for what we did? It's curious. So this short experience encapsulates many of the ambivalences in a lot of charitable and volunteer work. We spent a lot of money, mostly on our own tourism and having traveled so far. Did we really need to bring ourselves there? Well, don't get me wrong about one thing, it was a valuable experience for me. I lived for a week in the village and got to see how people lived there. And I gained from this insight. I did have the satisfaction of participating in international development in a small way. And for the organization, Bridges to Community, they advanced their stated mission of bringing people together from around the world to enhance understanding. And the locals got to see some gringos up close. But on a practical analysis, on the bottom line, was it worth it? I guess I would not have donated the $1,000 if I wasn't involved in this, but the $1,000 I did give went to American Airlines, then not to the Nicaraguan people. So this is one of the dilemmas around volunteerism, the question of whether there's a way to balance the inefficiencies with the benefits. Volunteers comprise a really big part of the economy. It's estimated that almost $200 billion in free labor is gifted to organizations and volunteer services. There's a valuation placed on this. $22.60 is the average hourly rate for volunteers. There's an organization that actually calculates it, so not-for-profits can put it in their bookkeeping. Most of the volunteering is done by people over 65 years of age. But here's a nice surprise among the statistics. The age group that volunteers at the highest participation rate is the Gen X group, born between 1965 and 1982. And I point that out because that's the age bracket that we always used to vilify as being uncaring and disengaged. Not true. By race, Caucasians volunteer at a rather higher rate than minorities, African Americans, Asian Americans, and Native Americans. By education, the higher the education level, the higher the participation rate. Women, more likely than men. Employed, more likely than the unemployed. Overall, more than 1 in 4 adults do some volunteering with a nonprofit organization in a given year. All these statistics, though, don't include people who are caregivers for sick family members. This only counts service through an organization. So there's a lot of uncompensated work going on in the economy. Volunteering may be a preserve of those without the need to work all the time, you might say, an elitist pastime. Some charter schools are known to require parents to commit to a minimum number of volunteering hours during the school year. That way, some say, they can cleverly screen out the less affluent by not being explicitly exclusionary. Just come up with a little formula. And a lot is written in human resource literature about the friction that sometimes arises between paid staff and volunteers who could do the same work, but for free. Volunteerism is a worldwide phenomenon. According to the United Nations, more than 1 billion people around the world do some volunteer work, mostly in their own countries. So are these people simply not paid for the work they do? We're talking 1 in 7? It seems a little bit excessive. But often they could be paid. These are jobs that could be paid if there were resources. Some Americans go abroad to do volunteer work of various kinds, like my trip to Nicaragua. Some call it volunteerism. Professional groups sometimes organize missions of mercy. I have a friend who's a doctor who organizes trips of doctors to different parts of the country to either give seminars to local medical professionals or to actually give service, and an optometrist that goes every year to Haiti. And they do good work, they really do. I once looked into volunteering to work on a scientific research in some exotic, far-off location. There's a group called Earthwatch, and you can scan the requests for volunteers for projects and expeditions around the world. But again, they had that same drawback. They all expected that the volunteer would pay his or her own expenses. You gotta fly yourself there, pay for your board, and then you sit all day like in an airy at the top of a tree counting beetles. So, I mean, it leans a lot on the volunteer. Here again, if you're looking for someone to sit in a tree and count beetles, why can't someone local be asked to do that, right? How much could it be per hour? Volunteering figures now as an important part of secondary education. I think this is what I meant by the new volunteerism. And it's an important part of preparation for adulthood, people feel. You can't get into a decent college today without a resume chock full of public service activities and volunteering activities to supplement your academic achievements. All told, a tremendous portion of society's active and productive labor is actually uncompensated. And these volunteers are working only for the satisfaction, really, of contributing to their communities. So let's step back and say, what is the value of volunteering as a practice? Can you measure the benefit? Well, volunteers help to reduce the effects, reduce the effects of poverty, improve basic health and education around the world, mitigate environmental damage, help cope with natural disasters. We all know the coastal hurricane damage. Volunteers stepped up. They mobilize communities, they hold governments accountable. They do this out of a drive to engage and participate, to seek justice, to soothe pain. They are the mediators, the companions, the listeners, the talkers, the gardeners, and the firefighters, hospital helpers, and school tutors. Really, it's a big part of our economy. But among economists and psychologists, altruism, which is really what volunteerism is, has always been a puzzlement. Why the heck would someone do something for someone else's benefit and do it for nothing? It's time-consuming, can be stressful, you take on a burden, people working in hospitals, think of it. It takes time away from your own family, it takes time away from paid work. Psychologists studied people who volunteered with AIDS patients back in the early years of the epidemic, back when it was a tremendously fearsome and prejudice over this disease. The volunteers, they developed a helping relationship with a complete stranger, and from that and later studies, the psychologists identified 5 primary motivations to volunteering. There's no surprises here, you'll recognize them all. One, simply the values. Volunteers sought to fulfill personal values or humanitarian concerns, broader issues than oneself. And for some people, this had a religious dimension. A second was a concern about one's own community, to help in the particular community, whether it's a neighborhood or an ethnic community to which you are a part. A third might be personal esteem, to feel better about yourself and to be appreciated. 4, to gain understanding, to learn about other cultures, to get yourself into another community, other places, with other peoples. And the 5th is a practical one, personal development, to further a career or simply challenge yourself. So by encouraging young people to volunteer and experience altruism through volunteering, it's hoped that these values can be cultivated. And then to attract and retain volunteers, a lot of writing in human resources literature about how you have to understand why people would be attracted to offer their help and to try to develop methods to really keep them and attract them. Certificates of appreciation. I mean, these things are symbolic, but they then do have some meaning. And keep reminding people of the importance of the work they do to support the mission that they've joined. Others have tried to understand the motivation from the standpoint of the impulse towards altruism. Psychologist Dan Batson from the University of Kansas conducted experiments, and he concluded that there is such a thing as true altruism, finding people can have a sense of empathy where they feel for others. He concluded that people are capable of a motive that simply has another's welfare as the ultimate goal. Economists may just not accept it, that's all, but it's true, he says. Another psychologist, though, Robert Cialdino from the Arizona State University, says no, it's not pure altruism. Instead, it's that someone else's pain makes us sad, and we can't stand that. And one way to make ourselves feel better is to be helpful. So he says it's basically about oneself, going to the root cause. I don't know. You can say that's a distinction without much of a difference, really. We see that many people are distressed by the pain experienced by others, and they are motivated to do something about it. You only have to observe any functioning society to realize there is glue holding the bonds of people together. Without a mutual concern, active engagement with one another, any society would disintegrate. The question might be, how few people must there be who are that engaged in order for a society to work? If 1 in 4, the number of adults who actively participate, is all it takes, well, who will be that 1 in 4? How do we encourage and support that one to show up, to provide the bonds of civilization on which we all really depend? Who are these elite servant leaders? In ethical culture, we have an expression we often recite. It's what our founder, Felix Adler, used as his version of the Golden Rule. It goes, act so as to elicit the best in others and thereby elicit the best in yourself. So it's an invitation, or rather an admonition, to offer a service to others, to reach out and communicate, to understand and to help bring out the inherent goodness in others. It recognizes that by serving others, enabling another person's growth, you elevate yourself by reaching into that better part of you, the generative, life-enhancing part that creates, that builds, that cultivates. If we seek to build a culture of ethics, if we seek to ethicize our world, our families, our workplaces, our communities, one is to ask, am I the one who needs to step up and provide the energy, the labor of love, to help things work here? This way, our species realizes its highest attributes, or the way our species realizes its highest attributes is by working together in community. So who will ensure that that happens? I often say that volunteer service, community service, is not just a good thing to do, not just a positive activity. I often say that in ethical culture, it's our spiritual practice. I know that many of you cringe when I use the word spiritual, but if you take away the supernaturalism on which the word often relies and concentrate on the facts, we too have a vision of the highest and best potential for humankind. We too have a set of values that recognizes the sanctity of life, honors and esteems the interrelatedness and interdependence of life, of our opportunity for deep and rich expression and sharing, for eliciting the best in each other. Then we too have the right to call our highest aspirations, our hopes, and our faith and possibilities a vision of spirituality. There is something that we can help each other cultivate in ourselves, and something we can help cultivate in the world at large. In fact, I think this is something we can do more intentionally here in our own community. Many of us here, of course, do volunteer and serve in humble work that gives direct service to others. I'd like to build on that work that we do to develop a program of personal, quotes, spiritual development, a program of volunteer service, of study, of reflection, of self-discovery, of growth, and call it ethical culture. A guided path of discovery and hopefully enlightenment. Maybe it will be on the ethical enrichment calendar next fall. I hope some of you will consider joining that. Okay, thanks.